So I think the biggest skill set you could learn when it comes to managing money, it's to become patient with money. That right there is a skill that people well into their 30s and 40s will struggle with. I can give anyone a budget. I can give anyone a debt repayment plan. But for a lot of people, they generally know what those steps are, but something still keeps getting in their way of implementing that advice. You could be looking on YouTube, you're looking on TikTok, you can see all this advice about how to build wealth, but there's still something that's blocking you from doing it. And it would be more behavioral and psychological at that point.
Welcome back to the Project WealthWise podcast. I'm Kinjal, founder of Project WealthWise, which is a youth-led nonprofit on a mission to financially educate young people everywhere. Today's episode has a deep focus on what anyone, especially youth, should do in order to ensure their financial prosperity. We are welcoming Parween Mander, founder of The Wealthy Wolf and an esteemed financial coach. So thank you so much, Parween, for being here today and sharing your knowledge and advice with us on such an important topic. So could you please give a quick introduction of yourself?
Yeah, I'm Parween. I'm a accredited financial planner and money coach, and a lot of my work is with first gen daughters of immigrants, working with them one on one with their finances. And so I help my clients budget, save, pay off debt, learn to invest, and really build that generational wealth. I was someone just like yourself at the age of 16, literally the age of 16, when I first discovered just like my love for personal finance. And ever since then, I knew I always wanted to be in this space.
That's wonderful. That's really wonderful. So could you please share how you got started on your journey of learning about personal finance and sharing that knowledge with an audience, and especially what inspired you to establish your organization, The Wealthy Wolf?
Yeah, so I think for me, a lot of it was a personal journey. When I was 16, like I mentioned, really got into personal finance. I just kind of recognized the role of money, and I knew I wanted to control it more, especially because I came from a background where, money was scarce, and I had immigrant parents, and they tried their best, but that played a role. And so I really wanted to sort of self-teach myself personal finance over that time frame. And while I was on that journey, I realized, there weren't a lot of money mentors that looked like me, who could relate to my experience of being a daughter of immigrants, who maybe could have that more of that cultural nuance of like the advice that I was looking for. And I just never felt comfortable walking into a bank branch and like talking to an advisor there. So it just felt like they were, not so helpful or supportive or a little bit judgmental. So I knew I wanted to kind of create a safe space that, for women like myself to come into, where they could get that financial literacy education, could get that one-on-one guidance, and that plan to build real wealth. And so that was really, the beginning of that for me.
I think that's so inspiring. Your mission, your objective to like help support women who, like yourself, sort of came as a first generation immigrant and might be struggling. I think that's a really wonderful mission.
Yeah.
Um, Thank you so much. So the first question I wanted to ask you when it comes to like actual conceptual stuff is, what do you think is the most important money habit a young person should develop before they leave home and begin to manage their personal finances?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, a lot of it comes down to behavioral. And so I think the biggest skill set you could learn when it comes to managing money is delaying gratification. It's to become patient with money. And so it's like, when you get your first job or you have some money coming in, not having that urgency to just to spend it all away and to be able to hold on to a portion of that. That right there is a skill that people well into their 30s and 40s will struggle with. And so I think the earlier you can start practicing the idea of patience, the idea of like delaying gratification, the idea of saving for things and not just spending money as it comes in, you will be set up in a position that a lot of my clients in their 30s and 40s wish they would have.
Absolutely. And I think there's such a big misconception that knowing how to manage your money is just about knowing specific skills. Like many people just leave out the complete mindset part of it, having that sort of emotional control, and they think it's just about knowing what ETFs are, how to budget, stuff like that. But there's such a
Yeah.
big like emotional aspect that so many people ignore.
100%, 100%. And that's the part that's going to set you apart too, right? So I can give anyone a budget, I can give anyone a debt repayment plan. But for a lot of people, they generally know what those steps are, but something still keeps getting in their way of implementing that advice. You could be looking on YouTube, you're looking on TikTok, you can see all this advice about how to build wealth, but there's still something that's blocking you from doing it. And it would be more behavioral and psychological at that point.
Yes, for sure. So the second question I want to ask you was when people, start to learn how to manage money, what is the biggest mistake you have seen them make, and how can this mistake be avoided?
Yeah, I think this kind of ties back into my original point of being patient and having delayed gratification. I think the biggest mistake people make is leveling up their lifestyle too quickly when they receive money or then receive a increase to the money, so maybe a raise or something like that. And so you have this more money, and so what you do is you go out and you get a bigger apartment, you go and you buy a new car, you go out and you just upgrade your lifestyle very, very quickly without having a plan to actually take advantage of that extra money coming in. So again, the idea of establishing your baseline of what you need and then trying to save and invest as much as you can as early as possible and not just getting into lifestyle creep, which is, you're trying to upgrade your lifestyle in addition to that.
Absolutely. That is great advice. Now, the third question I want to ask you relates to debt, which of course is one of the biggest stresses in some people's life, and many see it as unavoidable. So I want to ask you, there's a common sort of conception in society that all debt is seen as bad. So do you agree with
Mhm.
this, or do you think that some kinds of debt can be beneficial if they're managed properly?
Yeah, I mean, I think taking on debt for education, for example, or to level up your skill set, which will then have a return on a type of job that you can get or the income that you can have. I think in that case, when there's a planned output and a planned result of putting in that initial investment and taking on debt, that makes sense. I hesitant to say anything beyond that is a great use of debt because number one, it depends on who you are as a person and your risk tolerance. There is definitely, narratives out there around leveraging debt to invest and leveraging debt to like build wealth. And the wealth people, all they do is leverage debt. They don't actually use their savings, etc. But that's just not really applicable to the majority of people, I would say. And if anything, that really sets a really dangerous precedent of people saying, okay, I can like do this without fully understanding the ramifications of, hey, what if interest rates go up? Hey, what if you lose your job? Like all these things that could, stop you or prevent you from moving forward. But in the realm of something like education and leveling up your skill set, like, yes, it does make sense to leverage debt in that point.
That's true, that's true. And you mentioned how it really depends person to person, knowing what risks that you're accepting. I think that
Mhm.
applies not only to finance, but so many areas of life. Like if you're jumping into something without knowing what you're signing up for, then that can often turn out worse than better. But
Yes, totally. Yeah.
yeah, so what I want to ask you next is, in your personal opinion, do you believe a young person living at home is in a better place to learn about personal finance because, they can take more risks with their money since they're not necessarily relying on it yet? Or do you think they might be in a worse position because, taking all these risks and everything can set up detrimental habits for the future?
Yeah, I think when you're living at home, it is a financial privilege. And I do say the longer you can live at home, if you can tolerate it, the better. Because once you get out into the real world and now, a third of your paycheck is going towards rent and other utilities, that's a big difference, right? So being able to live at home and not and being able to have that money accessible for you to save and invest, you have a golden window of opportunity. Do not waste it because once you become a real adult and you're out there paying your own bills, like you'll miss that having that flexibility. So I think to your question, is it detrimental or is it beneficial? I think again, it depends on the person. I think it also depends on, do you have a plan for your money when you're living at home? Like, are you actually saving and investing that additional money, or are you just spending it because you can? Like you're booking trips and like you're just, spending a lot of money, getting a lot of takeout or whatever it might be, or shopping with that money, then we're not really setting up great habits for when you move out, right? Because that lifestyle that you've gotten used to and comfortable with of like how often you eat out and like how much you're shopping and you're not really paying attention to your credit cards, you're not really paying attention to your finances, that won't really translate well once you're now out in the world on your own and you have bigger bills to pay. So that can be a really rough transition. So when you're living at home, treat it like this experimental phase, right? Of okay, how much can you save and invest while living at home? What money habits or spending habits do you want to improve upon while you're living there? So when you do move out, it's not going to be such a massive transition.
Yes, I agree with that. I think
Yeah.
that's great advice once again. So what I want to ask you next is what is a money myth that you have heard that is not only inaccurate but is also detrimental to someone's financial prosperity?
Hmm, a money myth is, I would say, the leverage of credit cards. And so I think a myth that I hear a lot is, oh, like if I max out my credit card and then pay it off in full, that's really great for, my credit score. And people get obsessed with the idea of the credit score. But that is inherently false. And so the way that lenders and the credit bureaus look at your lending capacity is you're like, okay, this person is totally borrowing almost the max of what they have access to. That signals to them that, hey, this person needs this debt to live their life. Right. And so they don't have flexibility or maybe savings or, really good budgeting skills beyond that. So when you max out your credit limit, so if you have $1,000 credit limit and you spend maybe 900 of that or 1,000 of all that, they will actually ding you for that in terms of being negative, and that's not really going to be a positive. Okay. And so what you want to do instead is be mindful of spending about 30% of your credit limit. So again, of $1,000, no more than $300 on credit card each month. That gets reported to the credit bureaus. And what that signals to them is, hey, this person can use credit responsibly. They're paying it off, right? But they're also not someone that needs the whole amount. And so they must be more financially stable. And that's going to work more in your favor.
Thank you so much for bringing that up because that's a really unique perspective that I think not many people have heard of before. So thank you for bringing it up. I think it's really
Yeah, of
important for
course.
more people to know. So the final question I want to ask you today is if you could give your teenage yourself a piece of advice when it comes to money management, what would that advice be?
Okay, so my teenage self, a piece of money advice. Mm, I think for me, just given like in my personal background, I was always aware of the role of money, and so I was very frugal. Like when I worked my part-time jobs in high school, I saved the majority of that because I knew I needed that for tuition and university. And so, I didn't really live my life at that point in time. Like there were, my peers around me that were buying teen that were buying like all these things, and I didn't do that. I don't regret not doing that, but maybe I could have allowed myself to enjoy my money like a little bit more at that point in time because I really didn't have that many responsibilities that I do now because I have a mortgage and all the fun stuff. So that would be it. But I think that's coming from my perspective. If I knew I was already someone that saved, I was someone that was frugal and intentional with my money. I think the idea of like being able to have a little bit more fun and allow myself to enjoy that money, that could have been nice.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
So we'll wrap it up for today. Thank you so much for being here and sharing all the advice and insights that you gave. I found this to be really interesting, and I hope any young person watching learned a lot from this session, just like I did. So thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you found this discussion insightful and engaging. And as always, if you're serious about your financial success, make sure to follow us so that you never miss out on a future episode. Thank you for supporting our mission, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.